Baka mahina lang internet dito. Welcome back everyone dito sa latest episode ng Deep Dive. I'm just hoping na hindi tayo magkakaroon ng internet problem naman for some reason. Parang sinasabotage tayo. Obviously guys, mahalaga yung discussion natin tonight. Hopefully, at least we'll try to shed light on some big picture issue dahil within the next 12 hours or so, magsisimula na itong day of Sara impeachment rallies by different opposition groups. So, kung nakinig kayo dun sa or naabutan nyo yung interview natin with Senator Trillanes kahapon, magkakaroon ng iba't ibang versions. So magkakaroon ng prayer rally early morning sa EDSA Shrine, and then yung isa naman dyan sa may Robinsons in the afternoon, and then meron din sa Liwasan Bonifacio naman ng yung mga Makabayan block. So different groups are gonna have different events tomorrow throughout the day, January 31. So malaking araw yan. Again, I think wala naman expectation na magkakaroon ng 1,287,861. Hindi naman siguro ganon. But even if only a few hundred or a few thousand show up tomorrow, ang point naman kasi dyan is, the fact of the matter is, ang mahalaga ngayon is magkakaroon ng alignment in terms of positioning and messaging ng genuine opposition. At I think mahalaga na yung genuine opposition, mga tao who are out there voluntarily, they're not coerced, they're not told to go out there. Ito yung mga tao na lumalabas, taos puso, dahil naniwala po sila sa demokrasya, naniwala po sila sa accountability. Gusto nila magkakaroon ng pananagutan sa mga kababalakan na nangyayari sa ating gobyerno. So I think it's very important na magkaroon tayo ng ganitong events or rallies, because medyo magkakaalaman na if there could be some sort of realignment or alignment of positioning of different opposition groups. Is there really a genuine opposition? Is there a unified genuine opposition? Is there a future for a united front in that sense? And then at the same time, of course, mahalaga din itong issue ng momentum, because as I've mentioned earlier guys, unfortunately, sobrang umiba na yung momentum. In fact, parang na-ethics complaint pa yata si Dan Fernandez. Parang nakita ko may report pa na si Dan Fernandez ay na parang na-ethics report pa na or something like that. So that just tells you na yung mga tao na involved sa Quadcom, yung mga tao na involved sa when it comes to the whole Sara exposés and all, pati sila they're facing a lot of pushback, right? And nakita ko online, busy yung mga kaibigan natin ng mga trolls at mga troll farms. Ina-attack talaga itong yung mga tumatakbo sa darating na elections na involved sa Quadcom at mga exposés laban kay Vice President Sara Duterte and mga other things. So tingnan natin bukas what's gonna happen. But ako naman, we're not just here to analyze eventmentiel, meaning daily developments or weekly developments. Gusto rin natin na tignan yung big picture analysis. So yun po yung gagawin natin today. Now, before going to our discussion proper, and if for those who have been following me on Twitter, you would have a sense of what I want to discuss. First of all, nakikiramay po tayo. Actually, I was quite shocked nung nakita ko bigla sa Twitter kanina yung announcement. Nakikiramay po tayo sa Lagman family for the passing of Congressman Edsa Lagman. Ito yung announcement na nakita ko kanina sa ABS-CBN. And obviously, when it comes to Congressman Edsa Lagman, I would say that he has been one of the most eloquent, conviction-based, genuine figures of opposition and good governance in the Philippines. It's just, perhaps, well, this is my view. Sa aking palagay, isa siya sa pinaka mahusay mag-isip, malinis ang konsensya, an elder statesman of the opposition. I mean, obviously, part of me wish that there was even more appreciation of what he was bringing to the table kasi napakatalino, napaka-bait na tao ito. And perhaps it's also a regret that I was not able to interview him. Although alam naman natin mga kaibigan natin sila Christian among others had many chance I think to interview him and have interaction with him. So I really suggest guys yung mga kaibigan natin na siguro hindi familiar masyado sa brand of leadership, not only politics, that the late Congressman Lagman represented, pakitignan siguro yung mga interviews niya online. I really suggest also dun sa mga those who have a more literary bent, please also make sure na basahin niyo yung mga sinusulat niya, including on the newspaper that I've been contributing to, the Philippine Daily Inquirer. I came across his prose a few years ago, and I was quite impressed. I mean, he seemed like kind of a modern day. No, and I don't think this is an exaggeration. But kind of a statesman, man of letters, Cicero, Seneca type. Incredible person. At of course, nakikiramay talaga tayo. At of course, I know his loss is a big loss, especially sa mga kaibigan natin sa Bicol region at mga kaibigan natin sa genuine opposition, right? Because if you look at it, sa Lagman, whether it's during Duterte's time, whether it's during the first years of the unity, bago nagwatak-watak ang unity, he has consistently been the voice of conscience and genuine opposition and fiscalizing. Perhaps he was not as appreciated as other great opposition leaders, but if you really pay attention to what he has been doing throughout the years, talagang ibang klase itong tao na to. So, nakikiramay po tayo sa kanyang pamilya, sa ating mga kaibigan sa Bicol, sa lahat ng mga nagmahal kay Congressman Lagman. And as I always say, and remember we had this Volume 1 discussion with Ronald Llamas and Secretary Llamas and Professor Congressman Bello the other week. And doon binalikan natin yung legacy of the greats like Dodong Nimenso, who we also lost the other month and recently. So a lot of these great folks are passing on and joining the Lord and the Almighty. So it's important for us to continue their legacy by first remembering their legacy and having a discussion about this, right? So very, very important ito. So nakikiramay po tayo, and we'll wait for more statements and updates from his family, loved ones, before saying more about this, because honestly I don't know what are the other details and I don't want to preempt it. I think we have to just show respect, and nakikiramay po tayo. Now, I think we're at a very critical juncture dito sa ating politika, because katulad ng pinag-usapan namin kahapon ni Senator Trillanes, katulad ng pinag-usapan natin ni Justice Carpio, katulad ng pinag-usapan natin with different guests, there is really a distinct threat, guys, na kung tuloy-tuloy yung gulo sa Pilipinas, tuloy-tuloy yung kawalan ng tiwala ng taong bayan sa ating hindi lang gobyerno. Okay lang naman mawala ka ng tiwala sa gobyerno. Ang problema is that baka mawala ng tiwala at mawala ng ganang tao sa ating sistema as a whole. And that's where things get very dangerous. We have been already tiptoeing on towards the cliff, no? Kumbaga, no? The fact that we elected someone like Duterte back in 2016, who openly said he's gonna shut down the Congress and openly flirted with military junta and national martial law, the fact na pinabalik natin mga Marcoses, and the fact na now openly pinag-usapan, guys, ang issue ng revolutionary government, that just tells you na very, very delicate po ang sitwasyon natin sa bansa natin. So, whether you're pro-Duterte, pro-Marcos, or anti-Marcos, anti-unity, whatever po, kung ano man ang position nyo sa politika, I think all of us can agree that one thing we don't want to happen is magkakaroon tayo ng problema in terms of complete collapse of the constitutional order. Hindi po ako nagdidepensa ng ating problematic, corrupted, and oligarchic form of democracy. I think we really have to make sure na hindi na tayo oxymoron na elite democracy. We need to be a genuine democracy. But I think the worst way to solve the problem is to get rid of the thing itself, right? Which is to get rid of any effort at building democratic institutions and then going for something crazy. In my opinion, if we were to have a revolutionary government, meaning a coup d'etat, and an overthrow of a democratically elected government, I think tapos na ang Pilipinas. To be honest, we're gonna be stuck in a cycle of political crisis for a generation or more. Just like Thailand. And of course, I don't think we're at that level, but Myanmar is also a very, very worrying case. You know, once folks in the barracks get a taste of power or get a Praetorian sense of power, tapos nang usapan, guys. Good luck na lang sa atin lahat. So, the reason I'm saying this is because kahapon we have we had someone like Senator Trillanes. Tatlo ba yung co-attempts niya? Like, if Senator Trillanes openly on the record tells you that he's worried that there could be a younger version of him waiting to be activated, right? By these chattering ex-generals and Duterte appointee generals and Duterte body generals, then I'm actually going to be worried. Then I'm going to be really, really worried. And unfortunately, he kind of confirmed our worst fears. So whether napakinggan nyo yung year-ender natin with Ronald Llamas and especially with Justice Carpio, because with Justice Carpio, he also mentioned that again when we had interviews together. And then now, if someone like Sonic Trillanes, who himself has been involved in multiple coups, is saying that he's worried that baka papunta tayo dyan sa ganitong situation na hindi exciting part, but actually nakakatakot na part, then I'm telling you guys, we have to be very careful about what we do here. So, that's what I'm saying right now. Because there are people out there who want to be back in power or want to be in tandem with people who want to be back in power with their own vision of an alternative Philippines, who are just itching to overthrow the current administration. I'm just saying, let's just be very, very eyes wide open mode right now. This is not about being paranoid. Kasi sa totoo lang, guys, mas gusto natin na i-downplay yung mga ganitong issues dahil ayaw natin na magkaroon tayo ng investment confidence dip. Ayaw natin na magkaroon ng sense of panic. But I think we have to be very honest to people that we are tiptoeing on the verge of crisis, on the verge of a fundamental crisis that could threaten our entire constitutional order. So nakakatakot po yan. Sobrang nakakatakot po yan. I would give it a chance of 1 out of 10, but I think even a 10% chance is too much. It's too much. So, that's what I'm saying. Kasi magsa-snowball effect yan eh. It may not look serious now. It may not even look serious in 2 months from now. But suddenly, in 6 months from now or 1 year from now, it may look like inevitable. So what seemed like improbable could turn into inevitable. That's what we learn from history, including recent history, right? I mean, just look at the re-election of Trump or election of Digong in 2016. And I can give you a dozen other elections and other political events. And my goodness, look at the martial law in South Korea as we speak. One of the most developed and progressive and institutionalized democracies on earth. They had a martial law, and then there was a coup attempt, there was a counter coup attempt, and then now there's an investigation, now there's angulo. If that could happen in Korea, guys, I mean, good luck sa atin. So, against the backdrop of a possible serious threat sa ating entire constitutional order, I think kailangan talaga natin pag-usapan itong issue ng what is a responsible way for the opposition to approach the current conjuncture or political crisis, right? So ako, to be honest, I'm cautiously optimistic about the medium to long term. I think the fact na medyo hemorrhage yung popularity ng both notorious dynasties, that theoretically provides some room for third forces to come forward. And I know as we speak, marami rin umaatak kay Rafi Tulfo, I think for reasons that we all know. Some for political reasons and some for legitimate reasons. So actually, there's nothing given about our politics. Nothing is determined. Anything could happen in 2028 elections. And including the possibility that elections will not happen in 2028, right? So there's an openness, there's a democratic space there, and there's a moment of opening there and possibility there that I didn't see a few years ago, right? So in that sense, may chance talaga ang mga outsiders and potentially progressive outsiders, and potentially a kind of a pink 2.0 upgraded version of outsider. Right? So having said that, ang point natin dito is, what should we do? Right? What should we do looking forward? And at the same, what should we do right now? Right? Now, before talking about what we should do right now, let's do it a little bit more Star Wars. Let's talk about what we should do looking forward, because that will give an idea about what you should do right now. So yung tinatawag na shadow future sa game theory, right? Or I don't want to go into Hegel and how like the fall shapes the originals. I don't want to go into dialectical analysis. Let's just say Star Wars natin ng konti. Okay, let's go here. So kanina may pinost po tayo na ito yung mga kailangan gawin ng genuine opposition for the medium to long term, especially if you want to do something special in 2020 elections. Sabi ko, there are I won't say three evils, but I would say three fallacies or three pitfalls or three temptations, right? I won't say cardinal sin, but temptations that the opposition has to avoid and has to shun as much as possible. Ito mga talagang kailangan natin ayusin. Right? Kung yung tunay na opposition, yung pink movement, assuming tuloy-tuloy ang democratic constitutional order natin, assuming walang coup d'etat, walang revolutionary government, assuming walang constitutional change or cha-cha, assuming tuloy-tuloy yung current trend lines, these are the three things that they have to avoid. Unang-una, moralism. And I think this is important because in the next 24 hours, there are gonna be prayer rallies, there are gonna be demonstrations, discussions. So bukas try natin tignan what is the tone, what is the cadence, what is the tenor of discussions and discourse ng ating mga kaibigan dyan. For me, napakamahalaga na we dispense with not morality, because morality and ethical considerations are absolutely a must. Right? Kasi kung wala kang morality or ethical grounding or wala kang spirituality, you will be a dangerous person in politics, because the temptations of power are just infinite and potentially degrading, right? So I'm not talking about morality and ethical consideration. I'm talking about moralism. So what is moralism? Moralism is itong sanctimonious, self-righteous style of kami ang kabutihan, kami ang angkel, medyo na Espanyol, at yung kalaban namin ang demonyo, ito pang ganyan. Yung ganitong diskurso po, we know it doesn't work. It didn't work in 2016, it didn't work in 2019, it didn't work in 2022, and it didn't work in 2024 in the case of Democrats also in the US. It just doesn't work. It turns off people. Because you're automatically saying that anyone who supports the other side, the evil din sila. Parang ganon. That never works. Right? Explain ko pa more. I-theoretically ground natin yan. The other thing I want to discuss also here is that we have to also reject what Antonio Gramsci called economism, which is this kind of an obsession with looking at economic indicators, looking at corruption graph, ganon, purong ganon. Like you want to explain politics entirely as a matter of galit ang tao sa corruption sa lahat, purong anti-corruption lang tayo. Or ay tao lang, gutom ang tao lang, let's just offer them like free food, ganon. Yung ganon. Parang sabi nga ni, 'di ba, yung tumakbo si Enrile, 'di ba? Gusto ko lang marami kayong pagkain, gusto ko lang masaya ka, yung mga ganon. Yung very reductionist approach. And I'll explain to you why problematic yung ganito eh. When you focus on things that have to do with money, corruption, inflation, etc. Now, I'm not saying those things are not important. And again, the reason I'm very careful with what I'm saying is that because alam ko may mga walang yang tao dyan in the past, because they're butthurt with me pointing out their nonsense in 2022 elections, they always try to take things out of context when I say certain things. Nakita ko talaga mga walang yang yung mga iba dyan. So that's why I'm very careful. Usually mabilis ako magsalita, but now I'm being very, very careful. So we're not against morality, we're against self-righteousness. Sobrang iba yung dalawa na yan. Pangalawa, we're not saying hindi importante yung inflation issues. We're not saying na hindi importante laban ng corruption. What I'm saying is that hindi pwede purong yun yung obsession mo. Right? Yun lang i-focus mo. For instance, if you run a campaign saying that hindi kami corrupt, sila corrupt, botohin mo kami, it doesn't work. In fact, it's a kind of an economistic version of moralism. And then pangatlo, Actually, if you see, these three are interrelated. They bleed into each other. These three fallacies bleed into each other. And the third one is purism. So what is purism? Yung pa-woke, cancel culture, and self-satisfied silo discourse. Yung tipong ang sarap mag-posture, kami ay malinis, kami ang ganito, kami ang ganyan. Kung sana Norway tayo or New Zealand tayo, di sana ganito, ganyan, ganyan. Parang ako kung Norway or New Zealand ba? Hindi tayo Norway, New Zealand. And first of all, okay mag-feeling na kayong pinakamagaling at matelling out there. Alright? Anyway, because if you were in New Zealand or Norway, I'm sure ang daming ibang mas matalinong Pilipino ay sumali na sa politics noon pa. Because may mga kilala tayong kaibigan ng mga ordinaryong tao, the next thing we know, nasa German parliament, nasa Norwegian parliament, ganito. Kasi iba talaga yung sistema doon. So, first of all, you know, you have to understand politics is a game of addition and coalition building. So, let me go through these issues one by one para i-break down natin yan. Mahalaga yan. And once we're done with that, guys, let's talk about tomorrow and what are our expectations, our hopes rather, or what are our fears for that matter. Again, I'm very methodical. Mabagal lang tayo magsalita ngayon kasi nga may fear some people. Baka ma-butthurt na naman dyan tapos iti-twist na naman yung sinasabi natin. Unang-una, yung issue ng self-righteousness. Mahalaga yan. First of all, the reason why smart people like Gramsci were very irritated with moralistic approach was because if you take an overly moralistic approach, you also end up overly optimistic. The sense that since kami ang mabuti, since kami lang ang may hawak sa katotohanan or kami lang ang representasyon ng katotohanan at kabutihan, inevitably the arc of history will bend towards our favor. Yung mga ganyan thinking, yung inevitability argument. We heard that from Kamala Harris types, from Obama types, from Dilaw types, whatever. I can go on and on about this. Once upon a time from the Congress Party types in India, right? Earlier iterations of Rahul Gandhi. We used to hear that also from CHP in Turkey, whatever. It doesn't work, right? It doesn't work because kasi first of all, yung goody-goody talk na ganun and all, first of all, is not enough. And the reality is that the arc of history bends towards justice if you make it bend towards justice. So, you can go from Frederick Douglass all the way to Martin Luther King Jr. And if you look at their history, their life, their struggles, the number one lesson you get there, and in fact, Frederick Douglass has a direct quote on that, you can Google it yourself, whereby, if you want change, it's a marathon struggle. Hindi yung once ka lang magpakita dyan sa ganitong shrine or and tapos na. Hindi. It's a constant struggle. It's an everyday struggle for a better democracy and better country. And yun yung testament ng civil rights movement in the US and all sorts of different civil rights movements around the world, which actually produced gains. My favorite are actually labor union movements and social democratic movements in Scandinavia, Sweden, in Germany, so on and so forth. And to a certain degree, the labor movements in the UK, right? But ibang usapan, mahabang usapan. Do you get what I'm saying? So, first of all, kung moralistic ka, tingin mo ikaw lang tama, ikaw ang anghel, magkakaroon ka ng, I don't want to use the word delusion, but magkakaroon ka ng complacency na sabihin mo, ay, inevitable yan, kami mananalo kasi kami yung team kabutihan, etc. Wala naman problema na maging team kabutihan ka. Pero kung very self-consciously team kabutihan ka, baka maging overly complacent ka. Because you may fall into this trap. Now, I will consciously put this one next to the previous one because baka na naman, iti-twist naman yung words natin. I am not an endorser of Machiavellian way of thinking. But if you actually bother to read Niccolo Machiavelli's works, plural, works, hindi lang The Prince, especially the Discourses on Livy, which is a very Republican, forward-looking, modern way of political thinking in late medieval, early Renaissance Italy, in Firenze, in Florence, very clear yung mga top political thinkers that, one need, that ultimately a good leader is an effective leader. Ultimately, a good leader is a decisive leader. Hindi goody-goody leader. Right? That what actually we need is not a goody-goody leader or pa-cute leader or pa-Bible leader or sobrang malinis and pure leader. We need effective leaders. And in fact, the reason why a lot of people fall for the Duterte types, Trump types, Modi types, whatever types, is because, not because they think these people are paragons of moral, you know, wala. Medyo complicated na yung latest elections because Trump kind of tried to appeal to the, you know. But anyway, but my point is that, you know, we know lifestyle of Trump, we know lifestyle of Duterte. But the reason why people vote for these people is not because they're necessarily paragons of moral virtue, but because they're seen as effective and strong leaders. And being an effective and strong leader matters. That's why when Trump administration came in and told Netanyahu, we want a ceasefire, it happened. In fact, even before Trump came in, he made sure the ceasefire happens. But Biden, because he was seen as weak, you can say he's a man of virtue, blah, 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 but he was just seen as weak. It's so weakness doesn't work. Strength works, and strength is effective and decisive leadership, or at least perception of having effective and decisive leadership. So if you actually read the full range of works of Niccolo Machiavelli and his life, I dropped by actually by the Machiavelli Institute in Florence the other year. Actually, Machiavelli's obsession is how can you be an effective leader so that you can protect your national and public interest, right? So that's why if you're moralistic, you will miss that point. Kitang-kita po natin sa mga surveys, right? Since 2010, na yung numbers of Filipinos who prioritize goody-goody leaders over Filipinos who prioritize effective and strong leaders, sobrang the trend lines is very clear. Filipinos are looking for effective, decisive leaders. Kanina may nag-comment na henyo dun sa comment ko, ano lang yan, PR team lang yan. Kuha lang kayo ng magaling na PR team. Like, Kamala Harris spent $1 billion on PR people, right? You know, the opposition, the pink, they spend, all of them spend a lot of PR. We don't need PR people as, you know, as much as people think. PR people are going to be always there. What we need is deep thinking. And deep thinking that makes you understand the deep movements, the tectonic shifts, right, in the public sentiments. Hindi ito cyclical. Actually, there's a fundamental shift in public sentiments and what people want. If you bother to go through the data, comb through the data. And for some of us who bother to even write books about these issues, about populism, democracy, democratic deficit, democracy fatigue, as I called it a few years ago. So, itong mga bagay na hindi makuha sa PR yan. Dapat pag-aralan ng mabuti itong mga to. Alright? Pag-aralan ng mabuti. And it's not only about shaping opinion. People think politics is about shaping opinion. People don't understand. It's actually about shaping what people are already offering as a new political reality. Because throughout time, yung hanap ng tao, yung hinahanap ng tao ay umiiba. So your ability to shape their opinion through PR alone is limited by the parameters or coordinates of the more tectonic shifts in their thinking, right? Yung PR people, ganitong level. Deep thinking looks at those tectonic shifts that changes the configuration at saka yung receptiveness ng mga voters to a certain kind of messaging and all. That's what you don't get from PR people, no offense, right? Kaya kanina sabi ko, what the heck? Hindi ito PR lang. Billion yung ginagastos ng mga Democrats and opposition groups and talo pa rin sila because those PR people are not doing the deep thinking. These are not people, actually, ang dami kong kilala mga PR people, like, how, like, ano ulit mga, like, these people have not ever worked in a legit high-level media or whatever. Like, how do they even know about shaping public opinion, right? Like, so, no offense, but for some of us who actually have been at the forefront of not only academia, but mainstream media, etc., we know a thing or two about public opinion. But we also, if you do your research, you'll also understand that there's just so much shaping you can do if there's some tectonic shifts in public sentiments. Those are structural factors that transcend the more tactical interventions of PR groups. Again, no offense. So again, the reason pinapatol ko yung mga ganun is because I gusto ko talaga mag-level up na tayo. Kasi pagod na ako sa sobrang baba at shallow yung levels of discussions na nakikita ko. Right? Including from people who feel na alam nila, di ba? Yung sinasabi nila. And sobrang shallow yung mga level of discussions ng mga yan. Now, there's another reason why moralism is very dangerous. In fact, I'm deeply indebted to people like Gramsci for pointing this out. Kasi ang argument ni Antonio Gramsci is that kung purong iniisip mo is posturing lang, sabihin mo lang kami mabuti, purong tingin mo PR lang yan, kami mabuti, sila yung corrupt, actually, you may forget a more important thing, which is what? Organization and mobilization. Organization and mobilization. Mahabang usapan what went wrong in 2022 and what went right. We have a couple of episodes with people who work in different campaigns, including Lenny's campaign. You can go back to those, including people who work in her TikTok campaign. But what I'm saying at the end of the day, it's not only about the million people you bring together in one area every 3 months or 2 months or every election cycle. It's about chapters you build up in different barangays. It's about long-term alliances and coalitions you build throughout the country, throughout the years, if not decades. That's power. Yun po yung power. At hindi ka pwede umasa lang sa temporary enthusiasm-driven volunteerism. Kaya nga parati sinasabi ni Ronald Llamas, and I've been saying this even earlier, na what happened to the Pink Movement after the 2020 elections? Was there a registry of mga volunteers? Was there an attempt to keep them organized? Was there an attempt to make different chapters of that? My suggestion, for instance, was siguro yung Angat Buhay could be one of the, could be probably kind of a locus or a mitochondria of a kind of a nationwide movement for Pink Movement while we're waiting for the next election cycle or opening. So, yun po yung tinitingnan natin throughout different points of discussions we have had. No? So, kaya nga yung moralistic discussion ay very dangerous because it might blind you to tectonic shifts in politics and it might distract you from what you need in terms of actual mobilization and organization. And actually, and let me tell you what, pag gusto mo talaga, if you want to win over people, the last thing you want to do is to tell them you're such an angel and perfect person. That's like the number one way to turn them off, right? Kaya nga Gramsci, for instance, talked about folk culture. Kung kailangan mo brother Louie, kailangan mo maging jologs, go. If that's the way to be relatable, go. But don't stop there, right? Sayaw-sayaw ka, and then kausapin mo sila, and then mag-listening tour ka, and then tanungin mo sila anong kailangan ng bansa, and then tanungin mo sila anong pwede niyong gawin para sa kanila, and then slowly, once you get their trust, you can mobilize, you can build organization, you can build chapters. Ganun po yan, right? But if your opening is, magpasalamat kayo, may paki kami sa politika, at kami lang pwede magligtas sa inyo, at kung hindi kayo bumoto sa amin, ay, ibig sabihin, wala kayong alam. I mean, that whole elitist, bobotante kind of discourse, my goodness, ke horror, right? So, that's what I'm saying. These three fallacies actually bleed into each other. The second one we want to talk about here is what I call economism, right? So, for instance, Gramsci said, the problem with some folks is that it could be Marxists, it could be liberals, whatever. Masyado silang focus sa economic issues, right? Oh, mataas ang inflation, so ito na. Gamitin natin inflation ito para manalan tayo sa elections. Well, except, that's hindi monocausal eh. It takes many factors for something to happen. So, for instance, in the case of Trump's return to power, it's true that inflation was a factor, but there were other factors involved. Trump, for instance, was seen as a symbol of American strength. Trump, for instance, was seen as cool and authentic because nag-Joe Rogan siya, nag-podcast bro siya, dude paritol siya, because nakinig siya kay Baron and how to reach out to Gen Z. So there are many factors that came together. So if you center your campaign and all just on an economic issue alone, or just on economics, good luck sa'yo. Because you're gonna miss other important elements, including, folk culture, life worlds of people, ideational issue, identity issue, and also sense of security. People want to feel secure. Duterte was very good, for instance, in manipulating people to think, oh my goodness, kung hindi ako nanalo, maging narco state tayo, maging Mexico tayo, Sinaloa will take over. Hindi na mention yung triad masyado. I don't know why. I wonder why. See, that works eh. Law and order issues also work. One reason why Trump won is also law and order issue. He was seen as stronger in immigration, on criminality, etc. And then dinikit niya yung dalawa. Sabi niya, yung mga illegal na yan, ay criminal din, ganyan. So, dangerous ang economism. And in fact, our form of economism is actually even more problematic and more complicated because, for instance, pag tignan mo yung diskurso sa opposition, puro na lang corruption ang pinag-usap. Of course, corruption is wrong. Absolutely. I'll say this for the nth time. Kung may mga walang yan naman na iti-twist na naman sinasabi natin, yari kayo. Okay? Of course, corruption is bad. But, corruption alone doesn't explain all our problems. Actually, if you bother to read pretty high-level, cutting-edge research, Whether it's Professor Yuan Yuan, good friend of ours from Johns Hopkins' new book, China's Gilded Age. Or you look at books like Political Order and Political Decay of Fukuyama, or Kicking Away the Ladder of Ha-Joon Chang. There's so many works by, and have you noticed, none of them have Western names. Like these are people, Ha-Joon Chang is from Korean background, Yuan Yuan is from Chinese background. Like, these are people who actually studied Asian economic miracles in recent decades. At sabi nila, kung titignan mo yung Asian economic miracle, actually, lahat ng mga bansa na yan, ang taas ng level ng corruption nila in their high growth phase. In fact, the latest case is Vietnam. How many presidents Vietnam lost in the past 2 or 3 years because of corruption scandals? And by the way, there was also purge element and securitocrats and KGBs. But the fact of the matter is that if you actually look at it, it's very interesting. Corruption in the Philippines is actually, it's bad, but it's also a question of which kind of corruption are we talking about. So, for instance, as early as Max Weber in the 19th century and early 20th century, people were saying, so, for instance, this corruption perception index, right? Tignan mo yung, so the darker the color, the more corrupt. So you can easily see here, guys, the Philippines is not the most corrupt country on earth by far. There's so many countries that are just as red as ours, including many countries in the Middle East and Southeast Asia, which are actually faster growing than us and more developed than us, but they're more or less in the same level of corruption than us. And then, of course, there are countries, I think this is Colombia, some Central American countries, Sub-Saharan African countries, I think is that Libya? So there are many countries actually that are way more corrupt than us. So itong diskurso na tayong pinaka-corrupt, it's very problematic because, first of all, it's factually not correct. And for me, analytical is actually very poor. I'll give you an example. This is very interesting. So if you compare Thailand and the Philippines, between 1998 and 2022, there were many times whereby our level of corruption was almost similar to Thailand. And yet, if you look at Thailand, this is a country that has almost twice our level of economic development in terms of per capita income. So this is very interesting, right? So Thailand, very similar levels of corruption throughout a lot of period, and yet twice richer than us. Now, that doesn't mean corruption is okay. That just means that corruption alone doesn't explain everything. And it also explains, and it also tells you that you cannot reduce everything to just the issue of corruption. And more importantly, there are different types of corruption. So as UN, for instance, explains, there's access corruption, there's a grand theft corruption. So yes, it's true that problema sa Pilipinas, there's more grand theft corruption than access corruption. What is access corruption? Access corruption is when, for instance, businessmen pay for access to policymakers so that they can open up industries and businesses. Pag ganon, pangit yan, morally questionable, unethical, wrong, illegal, but it's developmentally not the worst thing because you're creating jobs and factories, etc. Right? That's very different from ninakaw mo yung pera, nilagay mo sa Swiss bank account or Caribbean. So just talking about corruption alone is very simplistic. You have to look at varieties of corruption. And also look at the fact that actually many countries in earlier stages of capitalist expansion and high growth, corruption tends to go through the roof. In fact, it's quite similar to the so-called Kuznets curve, right? So, for instance, in Kuznets curve, the argument there is that pag mahirap kang pangbansa, ang baba yung level of appreciation of environmental sustainability. But as countries get richer, they become more concerned about environmental sustainability. Therefore, there's more environmental regulation and blah, blah, blah. Actually, many would argue it's quite similar in corruption. When you're very poor, corruption tends to be also very high. And when you're very poor and then growing very fast, corruption explodes. But over a period, as you get richer, as your per capita goes higher, as more money goes into institution building, habang gumaganda yung sweldo ng mga policemen, ang gumaganda yung sweldo ng mga yung mga tao sa gobyerno, habang lumalakas yung ombudsman office mo, bumababa rin corruption. So there tends to be a similarity. So what I'm saying here is that I think sometimes we over-obsessed over like, oh, Philippines, napaka-corrupt na ganyan. But in fact, if you look at the big global picture, we're far from the worst, and that there are many countries who are very similar to us in terms of level of corruption, and yet they grow way faster than us. Or better than us, higher quality growth, more inclusive. So clearly the explanation that it's all corruption is very simplistic. It's factually false. And it's also very orientalizing. Parang binababa mong Pilipinas and you're saying there's something exceptionally wrong with us, right? So I just gave an example of like so much overlaps in terms of our ranking with Thailand, and yet Thailand has been growing very, very fast compared to us. over the past half a century. And now, even though their growth is slower, obviously way slower than us, their growth is generally has been more quality because it's driven more by manufacturing, it's driven more by exports, etc. So again, that means that hindi mo pwede i-reduce lahat sa corruption. Maraming mga ibang factors na involved there. In fact, I suggest you guys to read really interesting works by world-class thinkers and scholars. Whether it's Professor Bellius' Anti-Developmental State or Harvard University's Professor work, One Economics and Many Recipes. This guy's so there are a couple of people that I really suggest you guys to read. So this book, One Economics and Many Recipes, is very important because dito mo maintindihan na ang dahilan na nag-succeed itong mga country na ang dahilan na hindi nag-succeed yung mga country na maraming mga dahilan dyan, in short. You cannot just reduce it to corruption or geography or etc. It's like parang kaya nga sabi niya many recipes, di ba? So parang pagkain yan, di ba? Many elements have to go together. Temperature, quality of the food, yung proportion of it's similar in economics. So whenever someone says ganito tayo dahil lang sa ganito, that's simplistic, that's very questionable kind of argumentations, right? Okay. Again, we can have a longer discussion about it, but I don't want this to be an over lecture-ish type. I'm just giving you some sense of where I'm coming from when I argue along certain lines. Kasi nakaka-frustrate minsan na sobrang baba yung level of discussion, right? From people who should know better. And it's actually not helping the country, right? And not helping the opposition for that matter. Now, going back to these guys, actually, kung titignan mo yan, another problem also with this, this whole, if only how should I put it? Again, ingat lang ako kasi baka may matitwist na naman yung sasabihin natin. The thing kasi is, dapat maintindihan din natin, isa sa malaking dahilan na mataas ang corruption sa ating bansa during election period is because of how our institutions develop over time. So, ang term dyan is path dependency. Now, there are two classic works that I can suggest to you, and actually these two persons are related because one was the PhD advisor of the others. One is The Cacique Democracy by Benedict Anderson. It's an easy read. It looks at the evolution of the Philippine oligarchy throughout the centuries at bakit ganyan ka feudalistic or new feudalistic ang Pilipinas. And then there's this fascinating work by his PhD advisee, Professor Seidel of London School of Economics, Capital, Coercion, and Crime, where he talks about the role of bossism. So essentially, ang argument na is, ang problema kasi sa Pilipinas is na-introduce ang democracy when the Philippines was very backward and very feudalistic and only few people could afford to run and were qualified to run. And then over time, you created essentially a kind of a new caste, right? And this caste is the political dynasties we see until today, right? And then in the meantime, million ng mga Pilipino have been stuck in poverty, cycles of poverty, and worse, violence and suppression. And use of violence for suppression and voter disenfranchisement. Kaya sobrang malawak itong problema ng vote buying. So one of the things that irritates me a lot is that, first of all, may mga tao dyan na ilan buwan or ilang taon nag-work kay Digong and then ngayon nagmamalinis na biglang opposition na sila and people power sila and all. Parang anong credibility niyo to even talk about that? Or bagong racket nila purong talk about na-hocus-pocus yung election ng 2022. Right? Well, the bigger problem for me, assuming even there's a problem with the automation of elections and all, actually vote buying. Napakalaking problema yung vote buying sa Pilipinas. In fact, as one European diplomat told me, how can you even call yourself a democracy when so millions of people effectively are selling out their votes? What is the value of that vote? What is the value of that elections for that matter? Right? Gaano ka genuine yan? So, again, this has to do with our history, the timing, the sequencing. You see, these things matter. So, for instance, in contrast to us, Taiwan and South Korea transitioned to democracy when they had more than $5,000 to $8,000 per capita. I think at least $8,000 per capita. 1997, 1988, nag-transition sila. Ang laki ng middle class in Taiwan and South Korea. So, vote buying is not a big issue. In fact, it's almost a non-issue in those countries. While in our country, sobrang aga na introduce ang American-style democracy, very corrupt, very pork barrel, and then essentially we got stuck in that. So for me, in fact, the discussion in the opposition should be vote buying. What do we do with vote buying? How should we strengthen COMELEC? And then, what are the fundamental reforms we need to make sure na hindi depende million sa ating mga kababayan sa vote buying to essentially get by through another day, another week, or another month. Ngayon, baka siguro another week or month na ngayon kasi ang laki na daw yung vote buying ngayon 30,000, 40,000 of the numbers I've heard. Grabe. But, again, that's not a reflection of moral decay per se. That's a reflection of our political economy and the flawed way by which our democratic institutions emerged during the American colonial period. In short, it's way more complicated than that simplistic, elitistic, whatever nonsense na discussion we tend to hear from certain quarters. So we have to get rid of that nonsense kind of conversation. It's very, very important. And then, of course, there's the issue of pa-pure effect, purist, ganyan, ito ganito, cancel culture, ganyan. Well, pretty self-explanatory, guys. Diba? Politics is a game of addition. Politics is a game of coalition building. What we need here is to build the biggest umbrella of like-minded people possible. And now let me go to essentially what's the issue at hand, which is yung usapan bukas. At the end of the day, winners in politics are not necessarily those who truly represent the majority. The winners in politics are those who are best organized to mobilize the majority and convince them, or biggest plurality, dahil wala naman tayong round of elections, biggest plurality to convince them that their interest is the interest of everyone else. So it all boils down to discipline. Mobilization, organization, message discipline. If you don't have those elements, good luck sa'yo. No amount of... And the more you just get engaged in moralism and economism and purism, the more hopeless you're going to become politically. Now, thankfully, the situation is not hopeless. It's actually very hopeful. But there's a very big chance na this chance will be missed if hindi mag-upgrade ng software at mindset ng mga ibang kaibigan natin. Again, so you can clearly see what I'm saying here is this. Call out whatever you feel is in terms of kung may mga kababalakan sa budget. Call out whatever you think if may mga anomalies, etc. But never forget the big picture. Right? The big picture. And the big picture for me was always very clear. What we want to avoid here is a dictatorship. The one thing that is worse than a corrupt democracy is a corrupt autocracy. Right? And autocracy is by nature, with very few exceptions. Maybe Singapore is one of the few ones I can think about, or probably the only one I can think about. Without exception, autocracies end up very corrupt because there's overconcentration of power and no checks and balances. So, that's why it's very important, dun sa mga kaibigan natin who are trying to make our democracy less corruption-driven, I hope they don't do it in ways that allows for those who want a corrupt autocracy to come into power. I really like someone who pointed out, kasi yung libro natin kay Digong was, parang The Rise of Duterte, a populist revolt against elite democracy, right? That was the subtitle. And then someone said, kailangan ng volume 2, parang Rise of Duterte or like Decline of Duterte, the revolt against elite autocracy, which is true. I mean, if you look at the levels of, like for instance, 2021, our ranking was worse in the Corruption Perception Index. This is during Digong's time. So we can talk about Duterte Garks and all of that. But going back to, you get what I'm saying here. It's very important that as much as we want to improve our system, we also have to be very vigilant in making sure na hindi ito sasakyan ng ibang tao na actually ang agenda nila is not a better democracy, but agenda is usurpation of power for a corrupt autocracy. Or worse, a corrupt military junta. Yun. Kaya sobrang mahalaga na meron tayong discernment. I think this is the word we haven't used that much. Discernment is very important. I think judiciousness sounds a little bit too legalistic. But discernment is very important. And I kept on saying that. So, kaya naintindihan ko yung sentimento ni Senator Trillanes. Kasi parang point niya is, ang dami dyan na masyadong excited to jump the gun and go on and make statements na ito na, apocalypse na, ito na, this is the most apocalyptic dystopian budget, ganyan. Just to see that the biggest beneficiary of this well-intentioned effort are people who don't even believe in democracy at all. And people who have zero credibility to talk about fighting corruption, etc. Right? So, yun yung sinasabi, guys, na napakamahalaga. So, one of the things I hope to see tomorrow, guys, I really hope to see tomorrow, guys, is discernment. And not losing sight of the big picture. So, perhaps by bringing back the issue to piatos, bringing back the issue to confidential funds, bringing back the issue to EJK, and what I want to see tomorrow is all groups to put pressure on BBM to do the right thing on the ICC issue. Because unfortunately, I'm not sure domestic institutions, no offense, have enough political will to do the accountability job that is necessary here. I mean, yung iakyat lang yung impeachment issue para lang pag-usapan and look at its merits, parang hindi nila magawa. So, there has to be discernment. There also has to be collective pressure for accountability. And the EJK, for me, if there's, again, one thing worse than corruption, is mass killing. That's even worse than corruption. So, again, discernment is also about that. Keep in mind what is the greatest evil. Right? And then the other thing I'm hoping to see is people talking more to each other. Hindi tayo nagkakanya-kanyang diskarte. Yun ang parati kong napansin at nakakairita talaga. Lahat gusto maging bida. Lahat gusto maging David versus the Goliath. Lahat gusto yung issue nila, yun yung maging issue na pinaka-issue. Right? Yan ang problema natin. Kung ganito po tayo, wala talagang mangyayari sa ating bayan. What's gonna happen there is that the most organized nefarious elements will always dictate the terms of democratic contestation or worse, autocratic takeover. So, napakamahalaga sa tunay na opposition to have discernment, to look at the bigger picture, to have a sense of greater evil, to have a sense of message discipline, to have a sense of unification, because if the genuine opposition manages to bring its forces together, then they can become an autonomous force that not only could hold BBM accountable for years to come, not only hold Duterte's accountable for the crimes they have allegedly committed, but also to be in a position to win the presidency or at least shape Philippine politics in a more direct way in years to come. Do you get what I'm saying? Kaya sobrang mahalaga talaga yung discernment na yan. Sobrang mahalaga yung discernment. Kasi yun nga kung lahat gusto maging bida, right? Kung lahat ng mga ibang budding journalists ay gusto maging Maria Ressa, kung lahat ng mga gusto, wala talagang mangyari sa atin ganun. And that's why it's very important for us to talk to each other. Kaya ako tuwan-tuwa ako because in the past week alone, I've had the privilege of talking to Justice Carpio, to Senator Trillanes, to all of these different people with different perspectives and different thoughts. And I think that's extremely enriching. Sobrang mahalaga na we talk to people from across the political spectrum. Right? Sobrang mahalaga yan, guys. Sobrang mahalaga yan. And let me end on this note. This is a very important note. Well, it is also important because I have an upcoming... So, meron tayong talk in Manila House. Medyo sosyalin. So, on February 5, I'll have a talk with Asia Society. Thank you to Asia Society Manila House for sponsoring that. Actually, the topic will be Age of Disruption. And I'll look at three elements, essentially there. BRICS, ByteDance, and BTS, right? And the common thread there is China, right? The rise of China. And of course, yung DeepSeek ngayon, right? Sobrang impressive ang China, you know? And, you know, the reason why China is so impressive is because they're disruptors. Out of nowhere, they come up with new innovations and inventions. Kanina lang dumaan ako sa Huawei. It's very interesting because I was looking for an iPad Pro. Sabi ko, siguro kailangan natin na mas magana, ganun, for editing, ganun. Kasi itong ginagamit natin Pro, medyo na-overwhelm na sa editing. And then I look at the Apple ones. Oh my God, it's like twice the price of the Huawei one. Unfortunately, because of the nature of our work, I cannot get any Chinese technology na my software because, honest, like, yung TikTok natin, is obviously shadow banned or something like that. Something is going wrong with my TikTok. Na-ban nga siya suddenly that other week. Buti nga pinagalitan ko yung kinausap natin yung mga kaibigan natin sa TikTok Philippines. Thank you for restoring it. But, sorry, I cannot trust any Chinese software. But, having said that, I have a lot of respect for the disruption they bring into the table because they can create awesome technology at half the price. In the case of DeepSeek, they claim $5 million. I doubt their claim. But, like OpenAI was claiming that they spend billions of dollars to create that, I don't know, their ChatGPT. And then, ilang million lang ginawa ng OpenSeek. Of course, OpenSeek also pirated OpenAI, but OpenAI also pirated all of the material on internet, including our writings. But anyway, what I'm saying is that we are in the age of disruption, whereby disruptors have the advantage. We see that in technology, the Chinese are piggy riding on what's there and then pushing it to the next level, whether it's BYD, whether it's ByteDance TikTok, whether it's itong DeepSeek. It tells you something fundamental is going on. This is what PR people wouldn't know because, you need deep research and trans-historical thinking in order to understand what's going on there, right? So, again, as I'm saying, like, the best way to understand what I'm saying is that just like, for instance, compare yung iPad Pro ng Apple and then yung Mate Pro ng Huawei, half the price, probably even better, right? Or even better, bro. I mean, it comes with the keyboard, everything like that. So I was just very impressed, except, as I said, sorry, I cannot get Chinese stuff because of software security concerns, digital hygiene. But disruption matters. But what we want to avoid is bad people doing the disruption and winning the day. So what we need, guys, is good people should also learn the art of disruption. And you will not be able to maximize this age of disruption if you do not update your software. So it is extremely frustrating to me to see that certain people or certain groups and all, yung level of discussion nila is 2010 pa rin. Parang hindi na sila nag-update. iPhone 2 pa rin sila. iPhone 1 pa rin sila. Like, goodness, meron ng Samsung Galaxy, meron na palang S25. Parang 2 pa rin kayo, parang gano'n, di ba? Like, mag-update na tayo. In fact, a lot of things I discussed a while ago, these are not like revolutionary. These are just latest stuff na I think some people are not paying attention. Like, for instance, Yuan's work, fantastic work on age of the Gilded Age in China and varieties of corruption and their differential impact on development. Like, how I wish we hear more yung mga ganyan level of analysis. Or the role of industrial policy in 21st century. Right? It's like, sobrang hindi nag-level up yung discussions ng ibang kaibigan natin. And that's holding us back. Because obviously, you're not gonna expect yung mga mamamatay tao at yung mga magnanakaw to give you the good ideas. But if even the goody people are not giving you good ideas because they're not updating, the good luck talaga sa atin. Diba? So, in my own little way, this is my disruption, right? Like, going out there, throwing this intellectual, conceptual, whatever you want to call it, bombs. I know marami nagagalit sa atin, marami nag-irita sa atin. I could say that, ang daming comments. Ito naman si Aidara, nag-feeling na. And then dapat tingin, okay, sige, tara, tingnan natin. Anong ulit ang, fine, whatever. But my point is that I just realized, wait, parang hindi tayo nag-update ng software natin. Diba? Yung China, yung DeepSeek is may R1 na sila, diba? Kumaga, ChatGPT 1 pa rin yung mga ibang kaibigan natin. iPhone 2 pa rin yung kaibigan. Mag-update na tayo. But you're not gonna update if tingin mo, you already got the answer. Hindi tayo mag-update kung tingin mo, ikaw na. Kung tingin mo na kayo lang tama, kayo lang anghel, kayo lang mabuti, kayo lang team kabutihan, hindi mo. We need team kabutihan, pero kailangan din natin ng team katalinuhan, team ka-updatean. You know what I'm saying? You need all of those things, right? So kaya ako, every time, I want to just remind myself that we live in the age of disruption, I go and check Chinese technology. So last month, I was checking BYD cars. Incredible. At more than half the price, you can get a sense of a kind of a German luxury car with a BYD car. Except it's also electric. With 75% of the price, you can get a sense of Tesla with even better, final work. In fact, there was one, Hindi ko na may mga taga-Tesla pa nagsabi sa akin na aminado sila minsan mas maganda pa yung mga. But again, personally, I cannot do anything, like, because Chinese, it was like, if only I was not in the realm of security or West Philippines and all, believe me, matagal na ako siguro nag-experiment with China. But anyway, what I'm saying here is that we live in the age of disruption. And in this age of disruption, we want the good people also to learn to do the art of. So what we need is an art of disruption. And there will be no art of disruption if there's no updating of the software here. Even the hardware for that matter. So on that note, before I say something more and then mas maraming magagalit sa atin as if I care, but we're just trying to play nice. Please make sure na let's all collectively make sure that there's always discernment, there's always judiciousness. And despite our tactical disagreements, let's never forget that we have the same strategic goal for our country. We want to make the Philippines a middle-class society at the very least. I don't want to use the word first world. We cannot make the Philippines Norway tomorrow or next generation or who knows, next 100 years. I don't even think we should make ourselves Norway or something like that. We should make the Philippines the best version of itself. And it's very, very doable. But all we need to do is to update ourselves and make sure we learn the art of disruption and we learn to fight the good fight. Alright? On that note, maraming salamat. Thank you very much. Huawei, baka naman gusto niyo joke lang. On that note, thank you very much. Maraming salamat. And please continue to watch out for itong mga discussions natin. I know may mga naiirita sa atin dahil ayan na naman si Richard. Yan naman tayo. Magle-lecture tayo, magagalit sa sabihin na masyadong academic. Magbabardagulan tayo, sabihin na masyadong bardagulan, hindi professional. Bahala kayo sa buhay nyo. Basta ako, I'll do what I want to do and I do what I believe is right. And I feel we have been vindicated on so many levels, but at the same time, yes, we don't have all of the answers. We need to constantly update ourselves. So thanks to China, we realize that Apple has to level up. ChatGPT has to level up. And in this case, the opposition has to level up para may pag-asa yung ating bansa. Thank you very much. God bless and talk to you soon.